Welcome to If the Public Only Knew, the show that pulls back the curtain on what it really takes to build and lead a business. Host Gary Cinderbrandt sits down with some of today's most dynamic CEOs, founders, and leaders to dig into their origin stories, hard-earned lessons, and the missteps that nearly derailed it all. These are unfiltered, no-hype conversations designed to inspire, challenge, and fuel your own journey. Now here's your host, Gary Cinderbrandt.
Welcome back to If the Public Only Knew. I'm your host, Gary Cinderbrandt. Today we're joined by someone that probably didn't really think he'd end up where he is right now, sitting comfortably on a couch that's color balanced, looking extremely relaxed. Ari Rastegar is a real estate developer, attorney, and basically changing the shape of not just real estate in Austin, but pretty much nationally. But Ari, you didn't start out to do that. Take me back to the flippin' burgers days when you were growing up. And did you ever think you would become this version of yourself? How did it all start?
Those are one of my old partners used to say, questions are the answer. You want a better answer, ask a better question. So I've spent my life trying to come up with questions because one of the only things I've really figured out at this point in my life is that I keep proving myself wrong. Keep finding that what I knew before wasn't exactly the whole situation. But you're right. My dad was an Iranian immigrant and raised me as a single dad, effectively. And he had the idea that I should grow up in a very, regal, astute, high net worth kind of neighborhood. And growing up in Dallas, he went to night school, went to law school a little bit later on in life at Southern Methodist University, which is in Dallas, Texas. But it's also in the school district called Highland Park, which is the wealthiest neighborhood, so to speak, in Texas. And so living in kind of student housing at SMU, I was able to do sixth grade through 12th grade in the Highland Park School District. So it's kind of the poorest kid in the richest neighborhood, which I think has its short-term challenges, and I think over time has had some long-term benefits, quite frankly. So I wasn't really the best student by any stretch of the imagination. I had a really bad speech impediment growing up. And I think one of the things that was very helpful was growing up as a wrestler. And I wasn't necessarily the best wrestler in the world, but it got me really comfortable kind of being on my back. And my wrestling coach is still a very, very dear friend of mine to this day. And we talk about this quite often. And in between wrestling practice, and I was a mediocre wrestler at best, like we had more national champions on our team than I think any public school did at the time in Texas. So I was just getting beat up every day. Which I think later on in life, again, became a good investment to, being comfortable, getting your teeth kicked in a lot of days. So around 15, 16, I wanted a new car, and, money was scarce at the time. My dad had just become an attorney and, trying to, put stuff together. And he made a bet with me. He said, look, if you can save up the down payment for that new shiny Jeep Wrangler that you want, and you pay the down payment, I'll get the car for you and I'll pay the payments effectively. So the best job I could get was at Johnny Rockets in the local mall that all the kids, rich kids and their parents would go to. And I don't know if you've seen Johnny Rockets. There's still some of them around, 50s kind of little joint, and, me singing My Kind of Town to ketchup bottles. My salary was $2.86 an hour, and I got to keep my tips. So I took that job on when I was about 16 years old, going into a summer and working 40, 50-hour weeks. I was able to save up, to me, which might as well have been $6 billion, which was $6,000, which would have been enough to get my down payment. And I think my dad was just as surprised as me that I went off and did that he actually let me keep the money and still got me the car. But it taught me a lot about customer service, a lot about the value that you bring to a situation can be directly correlated to the amount of money or income that you can make, being the tips. And so I found that $2.86 an hour ended up being very, very beneficial for me. But I was a very bad student, and in high school, it was hard to be concentrated. Just a lot of stuff, I think, from childhood, whatever that is. We all have our story. I won't bore you. Um, but I couldn't really get into a major university. And so I went to community college. I went to two different community colleges, one of which, Blinn College, which is kind of the sister community college of Texas A&M University. I got in, was able to kind of learn how to study, as I never understood that study skills was actually a thing. I thought that was just something they put on the top of, the classes, but it ended up being real. So I learned how to study. I got in Texas A&M, as an English literature major. So I'd never really took a business course, never really took a math course, but I read the best books in the world. I've always been a voracious reader. My dad gave me Think and Grow Rich at a very young age, which was, really did shape my life in hindsight. And so I spent, 4 years of college reading Dickens, reading Chekhov, reading Shakespeare, reading Twain. And something happened, I think, that just opened up my ability to maybe dream something a little bigger than Johnny Rockets. And I didn't even know I was going to go to college. I thought I was going to maybe go try to get some sales job and go directly in the workforce. And my father, said, after you become an attorney, you can be an exotic dancer for all I care. So he kind of set my first 7 or 8 year goal for me. And so I had a path, I had a syllabus, I had to take these certain classes. I went and spent some time in Mexico for a couple of years doing a study abroad, learning, my third language. And somehow or another, through delivering pizzas through college, I started to think that things could get better. And through reading books and seeing the trials and the evolutions of the characters that I was reading in these books, I started to see those traits within myself, and things started to become more possible. And through law school, I had a very interesting opportunity in 2006, 2007. That should tell you the years of why that's significant. I borrowed $3,500 and used some of my scholarship money to buy a little single family lot, and knocked on a local developer's door that I'd seen his name on all these signs driving back from school. And in 2006 and 7, it was, for sale, sold, for sale, sold, for sale, sold, for sale, sold. And showed up at his office and I said, look, I don't have any money really other than this. Called that broker and he said the lot is about $3,500 to buy a little, second home, $110,000 kind of lake house type house. And if I put up the money, would you build it? And we split the profits. And we literally talked about this in his doorway. It was a 15-minute discussion. And I got to know him very well, know his wife very well, know his kids very well. And on the spot, he said, okay. So I started working on the construction sites at 5 in the morning, driving to school in work boots, tracking mud all through the hallways. And by the end of law school, we built a couple, sold a couple, made some money. And from there, after the world blew up, I had a lot of time to think, took the bar exam, and the path started to evolve as I started to walk through it.
Did you ever have a desire to practice law in the conventional sense?
I did. I did, and I did practice law. I was a criminal defense lawyer um, for a couple years. My father did a bunch of personal injury and criminal defense, and one of his dear friends and mentors is one of the most famous lawyers in kind of Texas history. And I kind of clerked for him throughout college. I'd go back and forth. He'd lend me the keys to his vintage Corvettes and showed me a little of the other side of life. And during law school, I worked with him throughout the summers, worked for him carrying his briefcase. And when it came time to after I passed the bar, he got me on the wheel, which is basically when there's not enough public defenders to defend a certain client, indigent clients. They will farm out those cases to people in private practice. But in order to be on the wheel, you have to have at least 10 years experience as an attorney to be able to do that. But the amount of hours that I had spent in trial with my boss, they made an exception. So I was the youngest attorney ever accepted on that wheel. So over the course of a couple years, I had been involved in quite literally hundreds and hundreds of cases, from little misdemeanors all the way up. So I got an incredible experience of being in the courtroom, from murder trials to felony assaults, all the way to misdemeanors, DWIs, you name it. So I got a very firm grasp in the practice of law and realized that at least that type of law was dealing with people on the worst days of their life. And that didn't bring me the level of fulfillment, regardless of the money. And I knew that wasn't for me, but I was very grateful for that education, for that, for the analytical, I think, skills that went in. And my license is still in good standing. I still very much think of myself as an attorney, in the DNA, because it's like being a doctor, in the sense of, even if you're not a doctor, you're still a doctor. Something happens, I think, at the core of who you are, that you don't, I've tried to go through the 10-step recovery program of coming out of being an attorney, but I'm still a recovering attorney, no matter how hard I try.
I completely understand. I know far more people that are happier no longer practicing than they were when they were practicing, especially the ones that kind of find or recognize that entrepreneurial bug. Let's go back to that little $3,500 deal. And all of a sudden, you go to a closing some months or a year later or so, and that $3,500 had a pretty good ROI. Did
Did.
that ignite something or validate something you'd always felt was in your path?
Um, I think it did. Yes, it definitely did, because it showed me that what it felt like to build something. And I mean that, and I'm a huge proponent. Anybody that knows me knows I'm a huge proponent of personal development. In fact, tomorrow I'm starting a 4-day Tony Robbins seminar. Um, and during this past year, I've attended five separate 1 week long events with either Dr. Joe Dispenza doing these meditation practices. I'm a huge proponent of meditation, huge proponent of all sorts of personal development. And, I found that the more that I built myself, the more that the business built itself in some regard. And I found that the more I could just delve deep in inward work, outward work, kind of, I don't want to say it took care of itself. That minimizes it, because I'm a very hard worker. There was years and years of my life where I slept in my office, as a 43-year-old CEO, to, I guess if you build everything that we own today in terms of the hundreds of acres, you add up the industrial facilities, the apartment complexes, office buildings, you name it, if you build all of the new development, this is billions and billions of dollars of value, that are there. But that all came from the work, I believe, that I did, through this inward personal development type work. And the house, what it taught me was, this was just a piece of land, and I had this thing in my head of an idea of what it could look like, and I was quite literally standing in front of something that I built with my own two hands. And that analogy rang deeper to say, well, I can build this with my hands, let me build myself. And if I could build myself into a skyscraper, the skyscraper would then stand in front of me, from a little single family home into a 50-story skyscraper, which we're happening to be building in Dallas right now, across from what'll be Goldman Sachs's new headquarters.
The concept of that level of personal introspection, it makes good talk over a bourbon, but most people don't have the guts to do it, because when they start to really look deep inside, they may not like what they find
And I didn't
necessarily.
either. I didn't either. It's my what I tell my friend, my best friend since we were in seventh grade, is in the other room over here, as the chief of staff of our firm. And so when you have a friend, that long through those years, they see the iterations. And he's been the same guy since we were in seventh grade, and is the best person I know. But seeing through these things, and being governed by your vices, or governed by, your demons. My joke has always been, I know my demons by their first names now. Like, I know the tricks, I know the triggers. Um, I know when I'm getting irritated. I know, when I'm feeling insecure. I know when I'm feeling vulnerable. And that's what happens when you sit with your eyes closed as long, and you write out these things, and you go through these processes. But something magical also happens. You begin to free yourself from the shackles of these subconscious triggers that govern you. And I thought I was out to be successful, early on, and I wanted to be rich. But in the process of doing this, I realized that I wanted fulfillment, and success and fulfillment aren't the same thing. How many very wealthy people do you know that are miserable? You know, take Robin Williams. It always keeps me up at night. In fact, him and my aunt were very dear friends. Both are passed away now. I think a guy like Robin Williams, one of the greatest to ever do it, hung himself. You know, or
Yeah.
how many, it's almost a cliche that these wealthy individuals, have no relationship with their kids, or their families are broken, their health is destroyed. And that didn't seem like a good deal to me. So I decided to invest in my health, in my own health, physical health. And I think my health regimens have been more covered maybe than my business regimen, in terms of the 200 vitamins, I take a day, the nutrition plans that I'm on, the exercise, the posture management, the meditation, you name it. And I found that the healthier I got inward and outward, the healthier the business got. And the more that I had introspection into my own personal failings, I was able to spot those same patterns in the business world, because everything happens in seasons. One of the greatest discoveries of mankind was that there's 4 seasons. Like when you look at tracking agriculture and the upward stroke of mankind, other than maybe the fourth industrial revolution, which is now more than the discovery of fire, the discovery of seasons and the cyclical nature of the sun, the moon, the the ocean, the ebb and the flow, like knowing that there is patterns. And when you can see patterns in yourself, you start to see that we as a people aren't as interesting as we think we are, that you start to see the patterns in people. You start to see the patterns or cycles in real estate. And when you start to see those things, you can anticipate them. And if you get really smart, you can become in sync with those patterns and start putting those patterns to work for you. And in working through those things myself, I started to see and demystify those in the business world, more and more.
So if you were asked in advance before you came to these realizations, what would the process be to get you to this level of awareness, but you knew that might be an objective, what would you have said?
I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have started this business if I knew it was going to be this hard.
Okay.
And
So
I had no idea, my naivete of what it takes to build a multi-billion-dollar platform, to go through add up all the degrees and all that other stuff. Um, the delusion I had of what it was going to take, ended up being very valuable. And like I said, I'm no stranger to hard work. Anybody that knows me will tell you that, my work ethic is, my work is my worship, is a better way to say it. Like my work, my contribution, um, and what I do in the world is my life. This is not my business. My name might be on the door, but that's my father's name, my grandfather's name, my great grandfather's name. Um, and it's my son's name, my daughter's names. It's very, very, very important to me, but I had no idea it was going to be this hard. I had no idea that I was going to have to scrape my soul out every single day, and peel myself off the ground day after day. And quite frankly, there's many times where I thought, after college I could have been a school teacher and lived a much happier, fulfilled life in that place. But since I am here, I'm going to squeeze the marrow out of everything.
so if you went back and had a chance to do it again, would you do it differently? Would you be that school teacher?
When I went back and did it again, hindsight is, cliches are cliches for a reason, right? Hindsight 2020, whatever you want to say. Um, I say that partially jokingly, because um, I'm a very blessed person and a very grateful person, in the sense that I really had no regrets, and I wouldn't actually change a thing, if you know what I mean. Those problems, are the gifts that we grow from. And I came to learn that life wasn't happening to me. And I thought, through, having a rough childhood, and I say that by, first world problem, rough
Sure.
childhood, I should say. Um, I'm reluctant to say that now, and seeing all the, um, you know, just the horrendous things that, you see that people are suffering with. My life was much more blessed than that. Thank God. So, but for me, it was tough at the time. Measuring cruelty against cruelty is cruelty itself. Um, but I thought that I was a victim. I thought that life was happening to me. I thought that, I had this sense of entitlement. Why should this be so hard? And, um, but now in hindsight, I wouldn't trade one piece of it for where we are today, um, without question. But there is definitely a part of me that loves education, that loves teaching, that loves being around people. And I've been able to fulfill that dream of being a teacher with my own children, with my own staff, with my own friends. And I get that level of fulfillment there. But I certainly, like I said, dramatically, dramatically overestimated what it would take to get here to this place, and how excruciatingly painful it was, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. But the funny thing about that is it ended up being worth it because, right, the pressure is what makes diamonds.
Well, and your story is still obviously being written. You
Oh,
know,
I'm just getting started. Gary,
I
for the
believe you,
record,
believe
this
me.
is the very,
I
as
know
a
you're
40-year-old
not done.
CEO, I have not even started. Like, this is the very, very, very beginning. We have a 50-year plan that I wrote out over the past 6 or 7 years. We're about to be in the seventh year of that 50-year plan. We're tracking well, and we're going to go do something very, very meaningful.
And my guess will be that that plan will evolve. That plan will probably grow
Of
larger.
course.
And there's
Yeah, the
probably,
plan is a bamboo tree. The plan
yeah,
is a
there's a lot of
bamboo tree.
segments of the plan you haven't quite figured out yet, but that's the beauty of it. You don't have to. You'll
My
figure it
my
out when you need
closest
to.
That's right. And my some of my best friends, best friends in the world, are of the Jewish faith, and they have a Hebrew saying that I love so much, that man plans, God laughs. And,
Always.
and I always think about that. So I plan, but the plans that the God that I pray to, the one God that I believe oversees all of this, has bigger plans for all of us than we could ever have for ourselves. So yes, I plan with this humble piece of my small 2 million-year-old reptilian brain, the best that I can do, and then let the rest iterate in itself.
So it might surprise you to know that, and this is something that I've really studied over the past year or two as I've dug more into kind of the neurological origins of success, especially what's common among entrepreneurs. At an early age, once I realized I wasn't going to get fired from Merrill Lynch because I was completely clueless, um, I kind of put a stake in the ground and said, I'm going to do this by this amount of time. And everybody who knew me told me I was out of my mind. It was achieving a certain level
Well,
of productivity and success at literally in record time. And I put the stake in the ground. I said I was going to do it. Oh, it doesn't happen. You're not going to do it. There's only 200 guys like you out of a company of 10,000. You're never going to make it, blah, 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 the whole 9 yards. Then somebody said, how are you going to do it? I said, I have no idea,
well,
but
how's
I
none of your
know I'm going to
business?
do it. I'm sorry.
How's none of your business? It's
Yeah.
Napoleon Hill talks about deadlines giving you, there's a great psychological implication for a deadline, but Simon Sinek, who's a brilliant thinker. I think his first book, it starts with why, or why,
Yeah. I
something
like
that starts with
Simon.
why. Yeah, he's I don't know him personally, but I love his work. And he said something really cheeky, that your job is the what and why. How is none of your business. And that's always really kind of
But
stuck with
but
me.
what's fascinating, and I think you manifest this as much as any entrepreneur I've ever seen. Our brains are unique, obviously. We're never, I don't care what they do with quantum computing and AI, it's never going to equal the ability to, or the complexity of what we can process in our brain. Literally, within a 1 second period, our brains are capable of processing 40 million pieces of information. It can be as disparate as possible. Some are autonomic, some we're aware of, some we're not. But there's a funnel in there called the reticular activation
Of
system,
course.
which allows you to take the 11 pieces that really matter and put a focus on them.
Well, it's like when you get the red Tesla and you never saw any red Teslas, you see red
Bingo.
Teslas everywhere.
Exactly correct. Exactly what that is. You are the living example of that. When we talk about where you are now versus where you were, you can go back and look at the individual steps, but there's no way you would have been able to plot that path from before. It's impossible because we don't know what life's going to bring, which I think is one of the greatest things about waking up above dirt every day. What's going to happen today? What can I learn that I don't know? And as I get older, and I'm a bit older than you, what I find out is I'm increasingly comfortable with what I don't know
Wonderful.
as opposed to what I do know.
Beautiful. And I think we share that in a very, and we, there's human needs, right? There's a need for certain need for certainty, that we need to know certain things as people, but there's also the need of certainty, of variety. Otherwise, shit would be so boring. You put a bullet in your head, right?
Yeah,
So I think that that's exactly right. And I think for so long, as I look back on, and I say this where, from a business standpoint, there's certain strategies that get you to a certain place, but those strategies won't get you to the next place, if that makes sense.
it
And I
does.
look at and I look at the type of, frenetic energy of like a founder of doing everything, wearing every different hat, sleeping in the office, and that would make a terrible CEO. But at the time, if you don't have that type of, building the plane, jumping off a cliff and building a plane on the way down, you'd never start a business. Nobody in their right mind starts their own business. The chances of a business being open after 1 year or 10 years, the statistics are, you're better off being struck by lightning half a dozen times than having a successful business over years. So you have to have that element. But then there's a point where the business has to reinvent itself to become more stable, have risk controls, and be growing revenues at 6% a year, and versus the 500% returns, or growth patterns you see at the beginning. But I see that as one of the beauties of our this human experience, this human experiment experience, is the ability to reinvent. And I think one of the greatest gifts our creator and their infinite intelligence, infinite wisdom did, was to allow us the blessing of being able to forget. So if we remembered every single thing that ever happened to us, every bump, pimple, insult, toe stub that ever happened, we wouldn't even get out of bed anymore. So I think there's something about the of having the things we have, going to the place that we are, forgetting certain things that don't serve us anymore, creating new neural synapses, because we call it muscle memory in kind of colloquial terms, but it's really not muscle memory. Muscles don't have memory; neurons do. It's myelin memory. The myelin sheath is where things get drawn into to create memory. Muscles don't. But when you build those neural pathways, you can also break them apart, and you can do things a certain way, and then you can start doing something different by consistent repetition, differing purpose. And I think that ability to change and pivot is not only the innovative skill set that will make businesses continue to survive, but that exact same analogy holds true to us as people.
No question. I think about memories that are emotionally anchored because you learn better, obviously, with an emotional experience than you do with a clinical or academic
100%.
experience. But, emotional memories can cut both ways. In the case of PTSD, you
Sure.
can consistently relive things, or in the best moments of your life, you could probably remember it. My guess would be you probably remember a lot about that day. A, when the $3,500 was committed with the developer,
I
and B,
do.
when you guys sold that house, you probably remember it.
I
But if I
do.
asked you well, you might know because you probably were disciplined. But if I asked you, what did you have for lunch 3 weeks ago on Tuesday?
Oh, I
You
couldn't tell
might
you
know
today.
because you're
I couldn't
disciplined. I know. But
I couldn't tell you what I ate today was the point. But I
right.
think you're exactly right.
So what's happening is those memories basically exist in a part of your brain that doesn't have a clock. They're always like they're just right there. That's why dealing with them on a positive or negative way is really tough to do. I think what you've done and what other entrepreneurs I've interviewed have done is you don't mind going in there and poking those things with a stick and seeing what they're going to do and what's the learning I can take out of this. Because the only way to get them out of your frontal permanently forever thought process is to deal with them and find some way to gain wisdom from what's happened, both good and bad.
I think you're
Um,
right. And I think it has to do, for me at least, is there's things that happen, let's call it. There's an event in your life. I think what we have the ability to do is to choose what it means. So you can take the same set of circumstances, two parent, there's a child that has the product of a divorce family, let's say, and they say, you know what, that means that I'm never going to be married and never going to have anything because my kids did it. You can take the kid from different parents and say, I'm going to have the best marriage ever. because the point is, in that meaning, we have the ability to change that meaning throughout our life. We can look at a situation was the front of our mind, and it could mean I'm traumatized, I'm hurt, I'm not worthy, I feel like shit. But then through a set of other circumstances, you could say, oh my gosh, this means that I can change myself. This means that I looked back in, I had the introspection, I found the reasoning, and now I'm free. So I think how we look at those situations and what it means, and being very, very intentional about putting the meaning that best serves us and gives us the best ability to serve is a more appropriate way to deal with those memories that have that emotional anchoring.
I couldn't agree more. It bothers me sometimes, especially with, for instance, in my profession, which opportunistically is probably at the best level it's ever been because of certain things happening with demographics and the retirement of the vintage
I like
advisors
to
like
hear it.
myself. But just give you an example, the number of advisors retiring over the next, let's say, 5 to 8 years, 38% of the workforce is out the door. They've built
It's
these great
incredible.
businesses. I have a lot of friends in Dallas. You may even know some of them. Some of the most successful FAs I ever met are in Dallas. One of them ending up owning a piece of an NFL team. When I met him, he could barely make his rent. But these are situations where you've got being a good financial advisor, really putting your client first is a wonderful career.
It
It's
is.
hard to get to. The craft is hard to learn. You hear a lot of negative things along the way, but if you can survive it, develop it, get the right mentors, it's phenomenal. So we've got 38% of guys like me are leaving, and the industry's growing at 0.3% per year because the
Wow.
people coming in, A, don't recognize it. B, they're joining these senior teams where they're way overpaid. I mean, you remember $2.86 an hour. My initial job at Merrill Lynch was $1,000 a month after taxes and benefits, like 575. Here's a phone. Good luck. That was it.
Yep. Yep.
And there wasn't a plan B. You had to make it. But now we're bringing a generation in that is being paid as if they're already successful and they haven't done a thing. So there is this
And it's a
enormous
disservice.
chasm.
I think I think you were saying the same thing, in that's a disservice to the folks that are coming in, because we value what we earn. I mean, it's a human the human nature of,
I agree.
it's just, and so it's taking the long-term approach to all of this, and I think it's very short-sighted, for the employers, whoever's decided to pay whoever
They're
these
all
people are.
It's amazing. They're all the same. I'm finally going back on the road again to do some teaching. I was in Michigan last week with 16 or 17. I call them puppies. They're earlier in their career, and they're all on teams. They're all making too much money, and they're saying, generationally, this is not, you know, what you guys did. And I looked at them. I said, the only generation you're in is FA, financial advisor, which means you got to go out and you have to figure out how to create lifelong relationships based
Build
on empathy and
relationships.
trust from the outset. And if that's not the job you want, you're in the wrong job. You shouldn't be here. And they were
Yep.
like, and the managers are in the back going, yeah. Right." So it's a complete disconnect. Um, a lot of the work I'm doing right now is in these intergenerational teams where it's the responsibility of that younger advisor to not just maintain the legacy of the senior team member, but to build their own legacy going forward. And it's challenging. And the firms are freaking out about it, and none of them have a good plan to fix it.
Sounds like a
Um,
great, great, great opportunity to start rolling up these RIAs.
well, the RIA roll-ups are working, but they have their own issues. Um, RIA is a different model, but there's a lot of very senior guys who've built great organizations. But the problem with the RIA business overall, most of the guys who are successful started out like I did. They started out the big brokerage firms.
Yeah, the relationships are theirs too.
Exactly. But where's the next generation of relationships coming from? That's
No,
the
that's
issue.
right. That's right. And
So
we've talked about this a lot in our, we built out this team. Our investors are public pension funds, insurance companies, a very large book of high net worth individuals, accredited investors, hundreds. I don't even know how many anymore. So we have like the institutional type stuff, and we, starting off raising 25 grand, 50 grand from anyone that would listen to me early, and putting them into SPVs and investing as a fund to fund, and then owner operating. We've collected these relationships. So I've had those conversations with the advisor at Fidelity when we had our QSIP numbers issued, or building our third party admin out. So in my business, we talk to a lot of these different groups, and we see a lot of the similar things. And quite frankly, right now, as we start to put together our first kind of institutional roadshow, I should say, because everything that we've raised and built and owned, we've done it either on a deal by deal basis or through my own relationships, etc. We're having that discussion of how can we work with these different folks that have these relationships and bring something to their clients that really adds extraordinary value, and can also dovetail on that relationship and let us build an ancillary relationship. Although real estate is a small allocation in the asset allocation pool of a lot of these advisors, real estate, I think, done well, is not a fix and flip business. Most institutional funds are 7-year with 2 1-year extensions, meaning that you're going to be talking to these folks for at least 10 years. So getting to know them, talking with them, quarterly reporting, annual reviews. So it's a great opportunity, if you do it right, that you wake up with, one small investor or one institution that's with you through one life cycle. You really get to know people, and you can really spend quality time with them and have the ability to build a long-term relationship.
And I would add that having been on the other side of the investment banking deal, which essentially, if you're going out and raising money, syndicate, you're functioning more as on an investment banking side. You're in the product formation area. I would always look at the numbers, but more importantly to me was I'd look at the person. Man, I would look at the motivation, and a lot of times I wouldn't even judge what their past performance has been. I wanted to talk to somebody that was open-minded enough to have learned from their mistakes. Someone that basically looked at this thing aspirationally and had a real vision of what it could become, even if they didn't quite know how they were going to get there. Because if I was
It
going to
it
commit
sounds
one of my investors' money,
it
I
sounds
had to know who's going to run it.
It's it sounds counterintuitive on its face, even as if I hear you say it, but it has so much wisdom in it, because it's absolutely, absolutely accurate. Back to the point of, it is human nature to first fail and then succeed. Try again. Like, I think of, one of my children learning to walk. They stand up the first time and then fall down. And you say, oh, it's okay, try it again. They stand up, they fall down. They stand up, they take one step, they fall down. Then they take two and fall down, take three and fall down. So it is in the DNA of us as humans, but something happens psychologically. And I don't know exactly when this is, but I've thought about it a lot. When was the point that us as parents went from congratulating our children on failing and trying, to reprimanding them for failing? There was a moment, it's like, oh, you failed your test? No, shame on you. You're in timeout, or you did something. And I've wrestled with this a lot, to where if you have an investment manager that hasn't gone out there and really got kicked in the teeth, they haven't done anything. In my book, which is not the great American novel, it's called The Gift of Failure. But I think my joke is it's worth the $12 on Amazon, or listening to it on Spotify or something. Um, I think a lot about my big entertainment business, because right out of law school, I started overnight a very, very large entertainment business, doing huge parties around the Super Bowl, NBA All-Star. We had signed literally the Black Eyed Peas and Sports Illustrated in our first year of business, our very first year in business, and had signed these huge, huge, huge acts when the Dallas Super Bowl had happened. I went to sleep, with millions and millions of dollars in the accounts from selling tickets and sponsorships. And then the biggest ice storm in the history of Texas shut it down overnight. And then all of a sudden, the chargebacks put us at negative $800,000 in a matter of 48 hours.
Yeah.
And so I look back on as being one of the worst, most traumatic points in my life. And I remember sitting in the hotel room afterwards, after signing the biggest gigs, the biggest sponsors, the biggest perform, the halftime show of the Super Bowl that year with the Black Eyed Peas, and they were our artists at our party. And I remember my wrestling coach and my father, kind of coming in, whatever, and literally saying, dude, like, this is the moment. Like, this is your moment. Like, are you gonna sit there and jump off the balcony, or are you gonna go get up? And me thinking at the time, what are you talking about? I haven't slept in a year and a half, pulled off the biggest coup in history, and then an ice storm. How am I supposed to plan for that? How does that go in a pro forma? Like, what does that go into a writ? What are you talking about? God hates me, kind of thing. And then turning that into, all right, let's get back up and go get them again. And the following week or the following weekend after those Super Bowl parties, the ice storm hit. I had signed a huge deal with Hugh Hefner and the Playboy Mansion to do our NBA All-Star weekend that was in Los Angeles at the Playboy Mansion. There was no bigger venue at the time, by any means. I mean, the tickets were thousands of dollars a piece. We had the biggest acts in the world. Snoop Dogg was performing in LA. I mean, this was like it was out of a movie. And Hugh Hefner and I were playing poker till 5 o'clock in the morning a few weekends before talking about this. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting in LA after the ice storm. I'm watching TV with Major and a couple of the guys that were with us, and I see the headline: Legionnaire's disease breaks out at the Playboy Mansion.
Yikes.
2 days before the event, Legionnaire's disease shuts down the whole place. So we have to find another venue, another thing. And I tell you all that because at the time it was the worst thing one of the worst things that ever happened to me, certainly professionally. And now when I look back on it, it was the greatest thing that ever happened because if I would have done well in those businesses, I'd have become the biggest party promoter in the world. I wouldn't have been able to fulfill my destiny of building communities and homes and data centers and empowering communities and shaping how cities are built, which is what I was born to do. So the worst thing, the meaning of it is, oh, I'm doomed. God hates me turned into, thank you, Lord. This is the best thing that ever happened. But it was the same set of facts.
It's fascinating. You were talking before about when, as parents, we go from congratulating our kids for trying and failing to punishing them for failing to live up to what we expect. I think that's something to do with car keys when they get their license. It usually is kind of the
Um,
tipping point.
No, I think it
Um,
starts earlier. If we're being
it
perfectly honest,
does.
it starts before that when it starts a lot before that when it starts with certainly at the latest, I think in kindergarten when it
Yeah,
starts to
I
have
think so.
grades, when there starts to be, oh, you got to do this and maybe and I've thought a lot about the reasoning. It doesn't, my youngest daughter is in kindergarten, my son is in fourth grade, my oldest is in seventh grade. So looking at them as a cross section and meeting their friends and meeting the parents, it's certainly now even at kindergarten or before where them trying or something, there's still a level of expectation. And I see parents getting embarrassed if their kids aren't making good grades. And so it starts working on their own self-interest, not just that of the children. And so it's something that I've been annoyingly curious about for many, many years because we fail to learn. That's that is how humans learn. We
Yeah.
experiment and we have experience. We fail. We try again. We fail from literally talking. Say your first word. Good, good, good. So, oh, you did great. You didn't do great. I couldn't hear what the hell the baby was saying. You said, oh, you did great. Try again. Try again. No. You don't say, oh, you stupid idiot. It's mother. Mother. Father. You say, oh, great job, honey. And you mean it, and you genuinely from the bottom of the heart you're encouraging that failure. And I think that's a tragedy that
I think
that
metaphorically, the way I always think about it, my kids are grown. They start in a crib, which is the physical manifestation of their self-contained, where they are. But as they grow, you let those fences become more of a vision than anything else. Keep them there for forever, but let them wander the grounds and figure out where those
the
boundaries
way
are.
you just explained it sounded like a prison, sounded like prison bars inside of inside of
It does.
inside of
Well,
a
think
crib.
about it. I think about that movie. It's like, there's Uncle Joey up against the crib, and later on in life, you see at the prison bars.
No, and
But I
that's
think
what
they,
happens in our minds, right? We become prisoners to our past experiences, to our past traumas, to our past things that without introspection, into those things, we can quite literally get locked into our own ways of being. And people say, oh, he's just like that, or this is just the way that I am. This is just and there is no bigger lie that we tell ourselves than this is the way I am, or this is just the way it is.
A lot of people just settle that way. Again, the problem with introspection is you've got to have something to look at, which means you've got to go out and have experiences where you don't understand what the outcome is likely to be, and you entertain what I would call the power of the possible, regardless of how irrational it might seem. The most successful people I know didn't know they were going to be that successful, but they just found a path that they had confidence in, and they iterated. They figured it out. Plan A didn't work. Let's try plan B, plan C. We're just going to keep going because that's important to me. What's out there?
I like that
Fascinating
term, just
stuff.
keep going. Keep going, I think is such a profound, simple 2 words, just, you know, keep going. And I think
Yeah,
that that could be a mantra for me of life, or for maybe any human that aspires, is no matter what it is, keep going. If you make a fortune, keep going. If you lost it all, keep going. Whatever the answer is, just keep going.
there's
Um,
two things that I could say confidently, and looking at my own experience and with the various interviews I've done, and when I would bring a new client on board, we wouldn't talk about what we are going to invest in. We talk about them. I want to learn everything I could because that would guide how I could best help them. But there's two things I've noticed that entrepreneurship completely requires um, an open mind and grit.
yes.
Those two things together, the keep going aspect of it and the ability to always be willing to learn, never thinking you're the smartest
I
people in the
think there's
room.
one more.
Go ahead.
I think there's one more. And in the attorney in me is devil's advocate. I think the open-minded one there, but at the hierarchy, I'm going to add one more thing to that, and I think you'll agree. And I actually think it's more important than both of those put together.
Lay it
Are you
on me.
ready? Hunger.
Yeah.
Because if you're not hungry, all the open-mindedness in the world, all the, because if you don't have the hunger to keep going, that endless strive, grit, if you don't have anything to keep going for, grit is useless. if you're
Yeah, I
not
would
if
agree
you're
with
not if you're
that.
not hungry. And so I put hunger at the top of that list, because people that have hunger, and you see this like in just the traditional children of wealthy parents. And this is obviously not there's clearly tons of exceptions to that rule, but the cliche of, oh, this is it's rich grandparents, rich parents, the kids are bums. Well, they're full, so how are you going to be hungry if you've been fed every day? But it's not something you can expect of someone. So I find in my own experience that I have an insatiable appetite, um, to grow, to contribute, to learn, to have an open mind, all the things that you say. But that's the underpinnings of all of it from my very limited experience.
Fascinating stuff. All right, thank you so much. Couple of things. Um, I know I have a lot of advisors who are listening to this. You're doing syndications. Do you have a distributor that you work through, or
So
if
we have So what we are doing right now is we've worked with advisors for almost 10 years in various capacities, independent RIAs, and some broker dealers, really in one-off schematics. But we're at the point right now where we see a massive opportunity to serve the clients of these advisors from this view that we have. And we have the risk controls for it, using a third party fund administrator, having 10 years of audited financials. We took that, the lawyer in me, put together this system where I believe that right now the greatest opportunity, not only for the managers in our business from a cost of capital standpoint, and working with real fiduciaries, to where we don't have to, because I'm not a financial advisor. I do what I do. I'm a real estate developer. But again, that line to some people gets clouded. But I feel like right now, working with advisors in particular is great for us, because I like to be able to talk to somebody that has the level of financial sophistication to understand our products, understand what they're doing, and allow them then to translate that to ensure to some degree of certainty that it's fitting within what their goals are. Because what I found a lot of times working with high net worth folks, they read them, they see them, they're accredited, et cetera, they want to invest. And I've heard over the years in certain stations, well, that was, 30% of my money. And I'm thinking to myself, well, it's not my job to know that per se. But once I hear it, I'm like, well, like you need to get a financial advisor. Like, go get an advisor, go through your 401, use a self-directed IRA, but that's not my job to do it. So we're now focusing a huge portion of our energy, me personally, to building a massive network of financial advisors so we can offer institutional grade assets with the entrepreneurial spirit of growth that they can invest with and work with for the next 30 or 40 years.
Now, are you going to focus on the RIA space, or are you going to look to platform at some of the larger firms?
We're gonna like I said, we've had issued QSIP numbers with Fidelity and TD Ameritrade already. So we've been in business with some of the big shops in some regard already. But that's yet to be determined. But I will tell you that our door is absolutely open to the advisors in various ways, and it's going to be a big part of my focus in 2026. Personally, our fundraising team, has access to family offices, institutional investors, to endowments, to pensions. But me personally, I enjoy working with the advisors myself because they're real people talking to real people. And I'm a regular guy from Texas. And I like that for myself. If we're going to sit and have a great dinner, talk about stuff, meet each other's families, it's very fulfilling for me. And we can also get, checks that are meaningful enough for my time. But at the same time, I can get to know cool people instead of just talking to boards and a bunch of committees and a bunch of stuff, which at this point is just freaking annoying. You do it, but I like the people. I like working with the people myself,
Yeah.
knowing that they're covering their clients, and I can build a great relationship with 5, 10, 15, 20 advisors in various cities where we've invested in 38 cities, 13 states, and 7 different asset classes. So we have that breadth. So having 5 or 6 great, financial advisors in LA or in New York, so it gives me a reason to go to those cities and hang out with my friends. And, because my business as a founder and CEO, business, and personal very much cross over in that regard. So I'm looking forward to having those discussions.
I could not agree more. Tell me about your book and how do we find you?
The book is called The Gift of Failure. And you can just get it on Amazon. I'm sure there's other distributions. The audiobook I actually dictated myself, which is a total pain in the ass, by the way. Like this, 200-page book took like 20 hours in a thing. But if you want to be bored by my voice for however many hours, you can listen to it on Audible or Spotify. And you can go to our website, to rastegarcapital.com. And again, we're very close to a bunch of this stuff. So if people fill out forms and I'm pretty, good, bad, or indifferent, you can look me up, I think, through LinkedIn and, all these I don't do any social media or anything personally myself, but, my team, some of my closest friends in the world, thank God, run my life. So if you want to find me, you can find me.
All right. Thanks so much for joining me today. It's really interesting to talk to. I could go on for hours to pick your brain. Been listening to If the Public Only Knew. Our guest today has been Ari Rastegar. And I say this with all due respect, one impressive individual. What you've done, I think, is extraordinary. And I think your ability to look inside for answers and your lack of fear of making mistakes should be emblematic for anybody that is looking to pursue something that perhaps just scares them a little bit too much. We face those fears.
That very much.
We get up off the deck and we move forward. Thanks again for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks for tuning in to If the Public Only Knew. Don't forget to follow the show and share it with anyone who's ready for the real raw stories behind the business successes. Join Gary next time for another powerful conversation that will leave you inspired and ready to take action.